on, the Seattle Seahawks. And while in the background they simultaneously pressure wash every section of the stadium, we try to tune out that drone and talk a little football with Curtis Crabtree, who covers the Seahawks for KJR Radio in Seattle and also works our graveyard shift, and we appreciate that very much because while we're sleeping, Curtis is keeping an eye on what's happening around the NFL. Curtis, welcome to the program. How are you?
Thanks, Mike. Welcome to Seattle.
I have been to Seattle once before. It was 20 years ago. This stadium did not exist. It was the Kingdome back then, and this place is magnificent, and I have a feeling that Thursday night it will be hard to hear yourself think down here as Peter and I try to file a report before the game.
Oh, yeah, it's going to be pretty loud here on Thursday night. I mean, just above us here, they're going to unfurl a couple banners from the Super Bowl and the NFC Championship, I'm sure. And this stadium gets pretty roaring for massive primetime games, and this will be no exception.
You know, it's been 10 years since a Super Bowl champion has repeated, and I know how hard it is to go back to 0-0 and climb to the top of the mountain. The Patriots pulled it off 03-04. I look at this Seahawks team, though, and in some respects, I think it's even better than it was last year. I don't sense complacency. I don't sense any type of satisfaction with the laurels. But do you sense that this team still has that fire, still has that edge that could take it back to the top?
Yeah, I think they do. I mean, this roster is still supremely talented. The young core that they have is one of the most talented groups in the league.
Wait, Curtis's mic isn't working? I can't hear anything.
I'll see if I can talk louder.
All right.
Maybe that right. All right. This team is supremely talented with Richard Sherman and Earl Thomas and Russell Wilson leading this young core of players on their team. And, you know, Earl Thomas and Russell Wilson are competing each day to see which one of them is the last to leave the facility because they want that to one-up each other in that regard. And that kind of drive between them, the focus that they have, helps push this team forward and keep them on message to kind of push forward, put last season in the rearview mirror, and do the best they can to shift the focus to what happens Thursday night. They really try to stress what the only thing that they can work through is what they have that day in practice. And so they try to take it one day at a time. It's cliche, everybody says it. They really try to, and it's helped them out in the past. And the way that they continue to go about things, they should have a chance to. They have as big a chance as anybody since that Patriots team to go about doing this.
And I think a lot of it, Curtis, comes from quarterback Russell Wilson. He seems to have that relentless drive to be not just the best quarterback in the game today, one of the best quarterbacks of all time. He does not seem like a guy who is ever going to be satisfied with where he is. Do you get that same sense, and does that trickle down from him to the rest of the team?
Oh, absolutely. Him and Earl are both obsessed about watching tape, about getting better. It drives them every minute of every day. The two of them having those alpha personalities, one on each side of the football, is the perfect setup for that football team. And Russell has had just an absolutely outstanding preseason. Pete Carroll said yesterday it's been near perfect, and it has been. They punted on their first possession of the preseason in Denver. Since then, if they hadn't doinked a 53-yard field goal here in the second half against the Bears, they would have scored on their final 12 possessions of the preseason with 9 touchdowns over that span. I mean, the offense is really clicking now, too. To go along with that defense and special teams unit, which are both good in their own right, if the offense takes massive steps forward with Percy Harvin being a part of the offense this year as well, all of a sudden this team could be really difficult to beat anywhere.
We saw Percy Harvin in the Super Bowl in that jet sweep, either the actual handoff or the fake handoff, and the problems that can cause for a defense. And that was really the first time we had seen that motion extensively. Is that going to be a staple in the offensive game plan this year?
Oh, absolutely. I think you see that from the preseason games that they have. His ability to give that fly sweep look, it stretches the field horizontally and vertically, to where it opens up space for the rest of their offense to work. When you have Percy doing that fly sweep motion, all of a sudden the defense has to stay sound on the edges, which creates more rushing room inside for Marshawn Lynch, which is exactly what they'd love to have. And then when you do get him out in space, you know, he's going to draw double teams more often than not. I think back to the Super Bowl, there was one play where he took a takeoff and they threw about a 20-yard in route to Ricardo Lockett because of the way he affects coverage. And just having that guy on the field changes everything for their offense. And it opens up everything for Doug Baldwin, for Jermaine Kearse, for Marshawn Lynch. And from what it looks like this preseason, he's fully healthy. And if he is, that should be a big boost for their offense.
Is Lynch still the workhorse, or will this be the transition year to Christian Michael, Robert Turbin, someone else?
He's still the workhorse, but they have to figure out what they have in those other guys. Turbin has looked really good this preseason. He had a meniscus surgery here over the offseason, which I think was one of the reasons he was slowed a little bit at times last year. and then Kristen Michael is their stud, potential guy who hasn't done anything yet. They need to figure out what Michael can do this year, because Marshawn's contract next year is a little bit of a problem spot. It's a big cap number. With Russell Wilson looking to get his new deal next offseason, that could become an issue. So they need to figure out what they have in Michael, what they have in Turbin, to see if those two guys can carry them into the future, or if they're going to have to go look for another running back in the next year's draft, assuming that they decide to move on from Marshawn this next offseason.
What's your gut feeling on whether Lynch will be back next year?
I don't think he will be. Even with the contract restructure, I think ultimately being able to save $8 million against the cap when you're about to be giving Russell Wilson $20 million a year. They may want to bring back Cliff Averill after this season, who also is in a contract year. He'll be a free agent next year. There's going to be other guys that are going to look to pay. KJ Wright, Bobby Wagner over the stretch here, and it's Marshawn's going to be 29 next season. He's getting closer to 30, which is the date it seems like all running backs tend to fall off. So I think ultimately they move on from him next year after this season.
You mentioned Chris Clemens, and when you think about that pass rush rotation last year, some of the pieces gone, but some pieces remained. And when we look at the whole front seven, Kevin Williams comes over from Minnesota as a free agent. Overall, though, do you think that the front seven, and specifically the pass rush, will be as good as it was last year?
I think it can be comparable because their two star guys are still there in Cliff Averill and Michael Bennett. They were able to re-sign Michael Bennett this offseason, bring him in, and throughout the course of last season, they really found a mixture of how to use those two in tandem with each other to really be effective in rushing the passer. Now they do have to change a couple pieces. Red Bryant's not there for the run defense. Chris Clemens, a pass rusher that goes away. They drafted a guy in Cassius Marsh out of UCLA, which should take some of that rep as well. They've got a couple other options. O'Brien Schofield has had a terrific preseason as an edge rusher, too, after having his contract that he was going to sign with the Giants voided due to a failed physical. He looks terrific. So they've got some options out there to where they should be able to stem the tide. Maybe there's a slight drop in production, but when they've got their two workhorse pass rushers and Bennett and Averill still out there, they should be able to be pretty comparable in their pass rush.
You mentioned Cassius Marsh, and that's kind of an interesting apples-to-apples comparison because a lot of people thought Marsh could be even better than Anthony Barr, who was a first-round pick of the Minnesota Vikings, and we'll see how those two guys play out as the season unfolds. When you look at the Seahawks overall, is there a weakness that should be giving anyone real concern?
Well, I think the area to look at is probably still the offensive line. I mean, they're about to start a second-round draft pick in Justin Britt, a rookie at right tackle this season. He won the job over Eric Winston here in training camp, and Michael Bowie, who ultimately had a shoulder injury and they waived injured, ended up in Cleveland. Russell Okung is working back from off-season foot surgery as well. Their guard position struggled last year at times, but they look a little bit more solidified here this season. But it's still probably the unit on the team with the most question marks about it right now. Between Okung, Breno Giacomini, and Max Unger last year, they missed 18 games combined due to injury, all in the middle portion of the season last year. And when those guys were out, that's when the offensive line really struggled. That Monday night game in St. Louis was, maybe the most obvious instance when Robert Quinn and Chris Long were hitting Russell Wilson just about every single snap back there. It's still the area with the most question marks about it. It looks like it could be fine, but there looks like there could be issues too, depending on which way it breaks.
Any surprise at all by the decision to cut Eric Winston, who has started every game for the last 6-7 years with one team or another?
To me, it wasn't really a surprise because Seattle typically only keeps 7 guys active on game day along the offensive line. And those 2 backups are going to be Alvin Bailey and Lemuel Jean-Pierre. Bailey at tackle, Jean-Pierre in the inside at center and guard. So if Winston was not going to be one of their active players making over $1 million this year with the veteran salary he has, it didn't really make sense for them to keep him at that point. And I think that's probably the reason they moved on more so than anything else.
One of the more intriguing decisions of the preseason comes at the punt return position with Golden Tate gone. We had seen it coming since May, and we didn't believe it. You're never going to put Earl Thomas back there and put him at risk, but Earl Thomas is the punt returner. Should fans be concerned that Earl Thomas could get injured, and if he's injured, who would take over?
Maybe we should start listening to Pete Carroll and what he says. A couple years ago, I remember it was this, same sort of thing where Russell Wilson, after their rookie minicamp, he's in the starting quarterback debate now. He's like, no, he's not, Pete. Stop it. You're just, he's not going to be the starting quarterback of this team, and then ultimately he was. So, in some of these instances, you have to listen to what he says because he truly means it. And I don't think Pete Carroll is worried about putting Thomas back there when it comes to injury. That part of the equation doesn't factor into him. Now, are they going to put him back there if they're up 38 to 7 or something in a game? No, they'll probably take somebody else and put him back there in a lower leverage situation. But Earl can be a special athlete with the ball in his hands. He had a massive punt return back against the Bears here, got about 15 yards from the end zone before the punter tripped him up, which had him angry as hell, too, by the way. But he's a dynamic athlete when the ball is in his hands, despite being a defensive player. And ultimately, he could give them a spark back there, something that they need with Golden Tate now in Detroit.
It's amazing because I think back to Troy Polamalu's early years in Pittsburgh, how explosive he was in the broken field, and I said he should return kicks, he should return punts, but you could never do that with a star player. The Seahawks willing to do it. Who would step up? And does this speak to confidence in the other members of the Legion of Boom, that if Thomas would get injured, the secondary will continue without missing a beat?
Well, if Thomas were to get injured, they'd probably have to turn to Jerron Johnson as their backup free safety at that point. Jerron is, I think he's about to enter his 4th year in the league. He came in as an undrafted free agent the same year as Doug Baldwin out of Boise State, beat out their 5th-round pick that year for the backup safety job, and has continued to grow throughout his 4 seasons in the league. He's a solid player, probably more of a strong safety than a free safety, but he's still probably the guy they'd have to turn to in that instance. And I still think they feel enough confidence in him that he would be able to stem the tide, at least in the interim, if it was a short-term injury for Thomas. If he goes down and was out for the season, obviously there's going to be a massive hit at that point.
Marshawn Lynch scheduled to be available to the media today. He doesn't talk very often. What's the over-under on total words that he says today?
45, maybe?
Let's go 45 and a half.
Okay, sounds good. I mean, with Marshawn, he just, for whatever reason, it's not like there's an adversarial thing there. He just doesn't want to talk to us for the most part. And, he didn't last year until he was prodded to in the playoffs, at the threat of being fined. So this may just be a continuation of that knowing that potential is out there, that he's going to go up and talk to us. I'm still not sure exactly how or how long it's going to go or the exact thing that's going to happen, but he's supposed to talk to us today. We'll see how it goes.
But what's at the root of it? We've heard Arian Foster, the Texans, recently say that the local media asks mundane questions. I remember Ricky Williams early in his career, he had social anxiety disorder. He'd do interviews with his helmet on behind that eye shield. What is it with Marshawn Lynch?
Well, I don't believe it's that. I mean, Marshawn has talked to us in the past, the first couple years he was here in town, and it was fine. He was always, I think he just all of a sudden decided he didn't need it anymore and just decided to stop talking to the media. And, for whatever reason, it's gone the way it's gone. And, last year, in some instances, it wasn't worth the fight to put up to try to get him to talk when he's not going to tell us anything anyway. So that's kind of the way it went. So, I mean, trying to get inside Marshawn's head is a difficult thing to do. So it truly what motivated him to do it, who knows? But from my standpoint, being around him the last couple of years, I just think he got tired of dealing with it and said, screw it.
Let's go rapid fire to wrap things up. First, if I give you Seahawks or the field to win the NFC West, who do you take?
Seahawks.
If I give you Seahawks or the field to have the number 1 seed in the NFC, who do you take?
Field.
Interesting. Who do you think, other than the Seahawks, is the most likely to have that number 1 seed?
I'm going to say New Orleans. I think New Orleans is pretty good this year. I think their defense is going to be a little bit better with getting a couple guys back from injury that missed last season. And obviously Drew Brees is still a tremendous quarterback and should keep them rolling pretty fine.
So Seahawks are the field to go to the Super Bowl.
I still like them against anybody on a field on a given day.
Even in the Superdome, Seahawks go to New Orleans and knock them off.
This is as talented a group as I've seen covering the NFL, and they've shown that they can win on the road. If they had to play one game, it would be tough. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, the way I see what I've seen of this team this preseason in training camp, they look as good as they were last year, if not better, with the offense working the way it is. So, to me, I still think they'd be the favorites, even if they have to go on the road for a game.
We have a couple more days before we make our official picks at ProFootballTalk.com. We wait until the latest moment possible because you never know what's going to happen between now and then. But great stuff. Thanks for joining us here this morning. I'm so used to East Coast time. It's still morning and fairly early morning here in Seattle. So thanks for coming out, and we will